All right, this is the second part of the Chapter 5, Section 3 notes. This is States form in Central Europe. This is really going to be talking about Austria, Prussia, and the 7 Years' War. All right, during this time period, there are several weak empires. Landowning nobles in Central Europe have a lot more power than they do in, say, like France or Spain, where there's strong absolute monarchies. So these nobles are the ones that are actually standing in the way. If you remember back from our prior notes, Cardinal Richelieu, Cardinal Mazarin, Louis XIV, they realized this and they started stripping the nobility of their power. We also have the Ottoman and the Holy Roman Empires, and they're also quite weak at this point. The Holy Roman Empire, probably because it is a loose configuration of states. The Habsburg family is working to make Austria strong, and at this point they control Austria and Hungary. Now, in the year 1740, Maria Theresa ascends to the throne of Austria. She is a fairly young girl. I believe she's like 19. She becomes Empress of Austria. Now, before her father dies, he spends most of his reign doing everything that he can to ensure that she does become the Empress of Austria. So bullying, cajoling, diplomatic work, getting most countries to assign something called the Pragmatic Sanction. In it, they promise to recognize her legitimacy upon his death. But of course, when he dies, Saxony, Bavaria, Prussia, and France all take a look at her and go, I'm not going to listen to you. And they essentially repudiate it or ignore it once he dies. Saxony, Bavaria, and France, yeah, they all ignore it, but it's Prussia that's going to be a real thorn in Maria Theresa's side. Prussia challenges Austria. Oh, yes, they do. Well, let's look at Prussia first. This is the castle of the Hohenzollern family. They are the rulers of Prussia, and their hobby, their overriding interest is army. All the Hohenzollern rulers do is play army. Eventually they get strong enough where they call themselves kings, and they work again to strip the nobility of that power. Sometimes they have to buy the nobility off, but they do end up becoming monarchs and give themselves the right to be called kings of Prussia. There, obviously is their castle, and it's pretty awesome. So let's talk about the guy that we are going to focus on, which is Frederick the Great. Frederick becomes king of Prussia in 1740. He has a very rough upbringing. We're talking like abusive. This isn't just tough love. This is abusive. I mean, there are several documented occasions where his father nearly killed him at one point, trying to strangle him with curtain cords. His father doesn't approve of Frederick and the fact that Frederick is interested in philosophy. Frederick is interested in the arts. Frederick plays a musical instrument. Dad has no use for that. Dad is all about the military. If it's not the Bible or a military manual, you shouldn't be reading it. So Dad and Frederick are very different. At one point in his teenage years, Frederick grabs some friends and essentially tries to make a break for it. Dad's response to this, when he catches his heir to the throne, is to have him whipped, and then he puts him in a family castle, a decrepit old castle, and essentially sentences him to solitary confinement for 2 years in this castle with no books except military manuals, governance, books on governance, and the Bible. After Frederick successfully pleads with his father to let him free or set him free and let him go, his father agrees to do that, but before he does that, he brings Frederick's friends and has them executed right in front of him, the friends that took off with him. So when Frederick takes the throne, he has been well schooled in military matters, and he continues a lot of the super strict military policy, but he has softened some of his father's laws. His father had a severe hatred of like Jesuits, and Frederick doesn't have that. So when Maria Theresa gains the throne, Frederick is the first one to jump on. He realizes odds are that the nobility within Austria and Hungary are not really going to listen to this 20-year-old girl. So he takes this as his chance to snatch a piece of land that he wants, and you can see up by Prussia. He wants this piece of land called Silesia, and it is fairly wealthy. And of course, Maria Theresa wants to hang on to it. But again, like he predicts, she has some struggle getting support. She does manage to rally her troops and to defeat the Prussians, but in the treaty to end the fighting, she does lose Silesia. As a result of this war, Maria Theresa benefits, but she also loses. She loses Silesia, but she benefits in that she proves she can lead her country. But this is called the War of the Austrian Succession because it is based upon the succession of Maria Theresa to the throne. Next, we're going to talk about the 7 Years' War. In this, Austria switches and allies themselves with France. Now remember, in our previous notes, France was all about keeping the Habsburgs under control. And then, boom, all of a sudden, Austria and France make this alliance. And they are against Britain and Prussia. And that is literally because Austria feels so threatened by Prussia that they need a friend. And so, for France, from France's opinion, it's better to have, this powerful group as your friend than as your enemy. So in 1756, Frederick launches an attack on Saxony, launching, again, the 7 Years' War. Now, in the United States, when we learn about it, we learn about the parts of the war that took place on our part of the world, and we call it the French and Indian War because since it was France and Austria versus Britain and Prussia, France and Britain fought each other here in North America. You have French colonies in North America and North America, parts of what is today the United States, as well as Canada. And, of course, you have the British colonists who are here. The French allied themselves with Native American tribes, which is why, from the American perspective, it is called the French and Indian War. You've probably seen it more frequently in books or movies like Last of the Mohicans. If you saw The Patriot with Mel Gibson, this is the war that he is famous for before the Revolutionary War breaks out. If you are still confused, which I can see how you might be, go over to Crash Course. Okay, Crash Course World History. It's episode 26, and John Green does an excellent job of explaining the 7 Years' War. He's awesome. All right, France. What is the result of this? France loses many of their colonies. They only hang on to a small chunk in North America. And Britain gains India. There's Queen Victoria getting the top of the Taj Mahal. And the efforts to seal the Franco-Austrian alliance would lead to, there's going to be a marriage. I'm not going to say it's disastrous, but it doesn't end well for either of them. Tomorrow, here's looking at you, Ivan.